Hi, guys. This is Miss Brown speaking. So, I'm sure you've noticed that we are now beginning to review. That does not mean that we've covered all the material. We still have left geometry and statistics, but we're going to have to do those and review at the same time. So, the spiral review is designed to help you remember some things that maybe we've learned previously in the year that maybe we've forgotten. And on this first spiral review, I want you to know that you must earn at least 22 points. I have actually upped the pointage. It did say 20, but I changed it to 22. So basically, you can choose which problem you would like to do. Like all the problems on the first row are worth 1 point each. All the problems on the second row are worth 2 points each. And then all the problems on the third row are worth 3 points each. And all the problems on the fourth row are worth 4 points each. So, for instance, if I chose to do three problems that were worth 4 points, okay, that would give me 12 points. And then if I chose to do three of the problems that were worth 3 points, that would give me 9 points. When I add those together, I'm already sitting at 21 points, meaning I would only need one more 1 point problem. So technically, I could do a minimum of 7 problems on this sheet. However, the problems that are worth more points are more challenging. So again, 22 points. Do the best you can. All right. I just want to review some things that we need to remember while we're doing each of these, while we're choosing what we want to do. So let's look at 1 point rational numbers. Notice it says no calculator. If I don't say no calculator, then you can use a calculator on it. If I do say no calculator, then depending on what the problem is, more than likely I'm expecting to see computations. Anyway, so this says circle the expressions that are equivalent to negative 1.5. No calculator. So I want you to notice at the surface, all those fractions look the same. We have 3 over 2. So, what I'm really trying to see is if you understand that a positive divided by a positive equals a negative divided by a negative equals a positive, and a positive divided by a negative equals a negative. And that's also true for a multiplication. A positive times a positive is a negative times a negative is a positive times a negative is a negative. That's all I'm looking for right there. The next one says circle the graphs that represent proportional relationships. Well, here we have to remember that proportional relationships or proportional graphs are lines passing through the origin. Okay, and we have to apply that to this problem. On point one, algebra, we have to simplify the expression. Well, some things we have to remember. We need to remember, first thing we need to do is to distribute. And I hope you look at that and you know what to distribute. But just in case you don't, notice outside the parentheses there is a negative. You can consider that a -1, okay? And that needs to be distributed. So that's the first thing we need to remember. while we're distributing, we need to remember our rules for positives and negatives. And I just wrote those right here. Okay. We also need to remember that after we distribute, we need to combine like terms. Like terms have the same variable with the same exponent. Also, when you're combining like terms, please pay attention to the sign in front of the term. And you have to use those rules for adding positives and negatives. Okay, let's look at the 2-point questions. The 2-point question says, the first one says, Justin tried to determine if he has enough money to buy a new video game. He started the day with $210 in his bank account. He spent $87.35 at a clothing store, $42.79 at a party store, and $25.68 at a gas station. Does he have enough money to buy the video game? Explain. Notice it says no calculator, so I would not accept your answer unless I saw your computations. And that doesn't mean you just write numbers down. Remember, when we are adding and subtracting, we go through processes of regrouping numbers and things. I should see that. Here, you need to think about your keywords. So notice some keywords is that he started with a certain amount. And then it says he spent. What mathematical operation does spend indicate? Okay. Some other things we need to remember is that when we are working with decimals, when we are adding or subtracting decimals, we need to line up the decimals. Something else we need to be proficient at is that when we are subtracting, we need to be able to regroup properly. Regroup means borrow, just in case you don't know what that means. Regroup or borrow properly. I still have students who cannot borrow properly. About like me trying to write and talk. That's not working out so great. Okay, so the next one, where it asks for a scale factor. I hope we remember that a factor is a multiplier. So in finding your scale factor, for instance, you see two similar shapes, one's just bigger than the other. In your original shape, notice you have this side, and in the new shape, here's the corresponding side. Well, you have to ask yourself, what am I multiplying by? What am I multiplying by to get my new number? And yeah, okay. And then you need to find side y. So that same thing that you're multiplying by needs to be what you multiply by here. Moving on. For this one, it says, which graph is a solution to the inequality? There are several things that we need to remember here. We need to remember when we are solving inequalities and equations, we have a goal of getting the variable by itself, which is called isolating the variable. We also need to remember that when you multiply or divide, both sides of an inequality by a negative number, you must reverse the inequality symbol. Okay, and by the way, I don't think I said this. All this stuff that I'm writing down, I don't expect you to write all these words down. I'm just going over this to kind of help you remember some of the things that we've learned to help us be successful on this sheet. Another thing we need to remember is when to use an open circle versus a closed circle. Okay, remember we have an open circle if we have the greater than symbol or less than symbol, and a closed circle if we have greater than or equal to. That equal to makes all the difference, or less than or equal to. Okay, let's look at some of the harder problems. So the 3.1 says a water, let me change pencils right quick. Says a water well drilling rig has dug to a height of negative 60 meters after 1 full day of continuous use. Assuming the rig drilled at a constant rate, what was the height of the drill after 15 hours? No calculators. Well, you're going to have to be very careful here. I want you to notice the measurements. Okay? One measurement talks about a day. Another measurement talks about hours. Because those are not the same, you probably are going to have to make some adjustments in the way you work with this problem. Okay? Anyway, the next one talks about determine the equation of the graph and the constant of proportionality. And notice I asked for units. Well, remember our constant of proportionality is represented with the variable k. And to find k, all we have to do is choose a point. Any point will do. It does not matter. And we have to make a ratio of y divided by x. And we need to do that division to make a unit rate. Make sure you do the division to get that unit rate. And you might be like, well, where am I getting this y and x from? Remember, these coordinates on the graph are in x, y form. Choose a point from the graph. And you might be like, well, you said with units. Where am I getting the units from? The units are right here. Time in hours, distance in miles. And your constant of proportionality should have units too. All right, and you might be like, well, Miss Brown, what about that equation? Remember, an equation of a proportional relationship is in the form of y equals kx. All you have to do is find what the COP is. And I am totally making this up. So if you do this, you're going to be wrong. Let's pretend like my constant of proportionality is 2. And it's not. All I would have to do to write the equation is just take that constant of proportionality and plop it in. That's it. Replace it for k. So my equation would be y equals 2x. Okay, but that's not correct on this problem. I just want to make that clear. The next one, write a simplified expression to represent the perimeter of a triangle or the triangle below. I need us to know that perimeter is the distance around. So how do we find perimeter? All we do is add up all the sides. And you might be like, but wait a minute, Miss Brown. I see variables and all kinds of strange things. Yes, you do, because we have already learned how to combine like terms, and you need to do that. Okay. The last row. A baker makes 2 cakes of the same size. At the end of the day, there was 2/3 of a chocolate cake left. And there was 5/6 of a strawberry cake left. The baker divided the remaining chocolate cake into 2 equal pieces and divided the remaining strawberry cake into 3 equal pieces. Which cake flavor had larger pieces and by how much? Again, some things we need to remember. This problem can actually be solved with a model if you know how to use a model. I encourage you to use numbers and look at keywords, especially that divided. Depending on how we solve this problem, we may have to remember how to how to divide, and maybe even subtract fractions. So I'm just going to put fraction operations. Okay, next one says, suppose that a butterfly can fly 82 feet in 4 seconds. And a dragonfly can fly 50 feet in 2 seconds. Which can fly faster and by how much? Well, some things we need to remember. We may want to make a ratio. As a matter of fact, we may want to make more than one ratio. Remember, a ratio just looks like a fraction where you're comparing 2 quantities. And we want to remember that we cannot compare fractions. That do not have a common denominator. Some things that may be useful to remember is that when we add or subtract decimals, we need to line up the decimals. And then also we're going to have to remember perhaps to subtract and regroup. Remember, regroup just means to borrow properly. Okay, So the very last problem is dealing with inequalities. We're just going to solve that inequality. And some things we're going to need to remember is in order to make that an easier problem, we need to get rid of that -2 on the bottom. So we're going to get rid of dividing by -2 by multiplying by -2 on both sides. Some other things you're going to need to remember is that if you multiply or divide both sides of an inequality by a negative number, and I'm just abbreviating this because this is a lot to write, you must reverse the inequality symbol. Alrighty guys, that's all I have for you. My intentions for this video was not to give you answers, but just to give you things to think about as you solve these problems. Thanks, bye-bye.